Okay, so based on what we saw in the previous slide about the different soil horizons in a soil profile, and from those specific soil horizons, I should also clarify that the B horizon usually is split into B or BT and also BK, which is that caliche part I told you about, that hard pan that forms between the B horizon and the C horizon. Okay? So what we're going to do in this slide is try to figure out which horizons we can see in these two different pictures. So let's start with the left one. So on the left picture, I can see definitely an O horizon that is fairly small. It's only this kind of top part over here that is fairly light brown, just below the bushes there. Under the O horizon, I see a very thick A horizon. So in the A horizon, remember, you still have about 30% organics. So that's what you're seeing here. After the A horizon, I don't see an E horizon. So remember, the E horizon is going to be the leaching or alluviation zone. I don't see one. So after that, what I'm seeing is the B horizon right here, where most of the leaching that has happened through A and through O is now accumulating in this B horizon. After the B horizon, right underneath, I'm seeing a pretty thick caliche layer, a pretty thick hardpan layer right here. And then underneath that, I see the C horizon, which is again mostly part of the eroded particles of that regolith that we call. So hopefully you are able to see some of those as well. So think about it for a second on the right image of the screen and try to differentiate the different horizons you're seeing there. So if you're seeing an O horizon as this kind of reddish brown, you would be correct. Then you have the A horizon, which in this case is much thinner than in the previous picture. So it's this brown kind of black area. Then you actually do have an E horizon. So remember that alluviation or leaching horizon tends to be pretty clear, pretty, there's not very much minerals in it. So it's pretty white for the most part, or at least gray. So that's what we're seeing right there. And then underneath it, you have that accumulation zone from the B horizon, all of this, mostly in the top, but you also have some in the bottom. And then towards the bottom of the picture, you're starting to see what can either be a caliche or it could be the C horizon, but it's hard to tell from the picture. And with that, I should clarify that, most of these are pictures, and so it is very hard to actually determine the horizon type from a picture. Yes, it helps a lot to have the color, but many a times we need to see the texture and see the actual soil, test the different chemistries that there are in it to identify its corresponding horizon. Okay, so definitely it's a good skill to have, but it's not always easy to determine from pictures. So what we got here is going to be the relative soil profile development or the soil chronosequence. So that's going to be the amount of time that has happened for a specific soil to develop. Okay, so as you are seeing here in this diagram, they're giving you a big idea of how carbon-14 comes into the atmosphere and how it is further on deposited into different parts of the soil. So before I go ahead and do that, I have to remind you of a specific thing in chemistry that is going to be called an isotope. So we looked at different isotopes when we were talking about climate change and oxygen-16 to oxygen-18 isotope or contents in the water or in different organisms or whatnot. So carbon-14 works in a similar way as did that different ratio of oxygen. However, carbon-14 is a radioactive isotope, so it's going to decay as years go by. And I'm going to try to explain that to you as best as I can. So basically, as you're seeing in the diagram, the first thing that you have is nitrogen 14 in the atmosphere. Wow, one second, I'm going to open the door for my dog. So as I was saying, nitrogen is going to be produced and going to live pretty much in the atmosphere. As you know, our atmosphere is about 72% of nitrogen, or 75, 78, something like that. Pretty high amounts of nitrogen. So you're going to have nitrogen in abundance in the atmosphere. How a carbon-14 comes to be is that a neutron is going to be incorporated in the nitrogen molecule, if you were the atom there, and then one of the protons from that nitrogen is going to exit. So now the nitrogen is going to become a carbon-14. So carbon-14 has 8 neutrons and 6 protons. Okay? So I should make another clarification, and is that the most common type of carbon that we have on Earth is carbon-12, in which case you have 6 protons and 6 neutrons. We also have carbon-13, which has 6 protons and 7 neutrons. Those respectively have about 99% of our carbon is carbon-12, and then close to 1% is carbon-13. The remaining amount is carbon-14, so very small amounts. I think it's 1 part in every billion or trillion even of carbons that we have. So definitely a small amount is going to be part of this carbon-14 that is in the world itself. Okay, so that is how you get the carbon-14 into the atmosphere. How the carbon-14 goes from the atmosphere to being in the soils is as you're seeing in the little diagram. You see any carbon really reacts to make different molecules. One of those molecules is going to be carbon dioxide. And as some of you may know, plants use carbon dioxide to do their photosynthesis. So they basically intake that carbon dioxide, and now that carbon dioxide is going to remain within their organism. So once animals ingest basically ingest the plants themselves, they are now transferring that carbon-14 that used to be in the plants into their own system, and that carbon-14 is going to remain in the organism system until it exits. Many a times it doesn't exit necessarily through the metabolic route, if you would, but it's going to remain in the organism structure, so in its bones and its tissues. So as you may know, a lot of our structure and tissues is made out of carbon, and if we were to ingest some of that carbon-14, then some of our whole structure is made out of that carbon-14. Okay, so once animals or humans or whatever, we're animals I guess, but once the organism that ingests the carbon-14 perishes and is buried into the soil, then that carbon-14 remains in our death or perished body, if you would, right? And once the carbon-14 remains for long enough times, it will decay back into nitrogen-14. So that decaying back is going to be called radioactive decay. So radioactive decay is different for each specific radioactive isotope. For carbon-14, I believe the time that it decays at is every 5,700 years. More or less 5,700 years. So that means that assume that I die right now and I have 10 atoms of carbon-14 in my body. Once I am buried into the ground, and say I remain in the ground for 6,000 years, then those 10 different atoms of carbon-14 decay, or 5 of them will decay basically into nitrogen-14. So now I will only have 5 carbon-14 atoms, and I will have 5 nitrogen-14 atoms that used to be carbon-14. If I let another close to 6,000 years go by, then now I only have 2.5 atoms of the carbon-14 and 7.5 of the nitrogen-14 that the carbon-14 decayed to. If I let another 6,000 years go by, then I only have 1.25 atoms of the carbon-14, and then the remaining of that initial 10 from the nitrogen-14. So hopefully you're getting the idea. Every time that the atom decays, is going to decay half of its content, basically. So we call that time of decay the half-life of that specific element, of that specific atom or isotope, right? Okay, so hopefully you got all that. If not, definitely look it up. It's not crazy hard, but it's actually super useful to understand much of the dating that is being done in geology and in sciences like biology and chemistry and physics even, definitely as well. So look it up. Radioactive dating is amazing, and we can use many different radioactive isotopes to do it. Carbon-14 is definitely one of the most used, especially in biology. But there are many others that we use. For example, argon dating is very common. Uranium and lead dating is very common in geology as well. So there are many others out there. Okay, but basically, based on that carbon-14 dating, we are able to see how old the soils are. So if you find any trace of carbon-14 inside an organism that has been buried in the soil for however many thousands of years, we're able to determine how old the soil is. And based on that, we can see that weakly developed soil, meaning soil that is not, very developed, it doesn't have all the soil horizons within, is usually between 100 and thousands of years old. Okay, so that's a weakly developed soil. A moderately developed soil is going to be at least 10,000 years. And then a very well-developed soil is going to have lived basically for somewhere between 40,000 years and 100,000 years or more. So think about how humans have really changed that possibility for the soil to undergo that transformation, to undergo that development. Think about how fast we can basically erode that soil and destroy everything that the development of it could have been in terms of years. It's pretty impressive, right? Okay, but keep those numbers in mind. Again, well developed between 40,000 and 100,000, moderately developed at least 10,000, and then weakly developed between hundreds to thousands of years. This slide, we're going to go over the soil texture itself. So many soils have very many different textures, and this is not really geology, this is more like soil science, which I also recommend you take a class in that. It's very cool. I took one about soil remediation, so different remediation strategies for soil that has been damaged either by human activity or just natural events. For example, my project was about soil that was affected by wildfires, so that was really cool. But anyways, I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about this triangle, which I don't even know what they call it. I think it's just soil texture triangle, to be completely honest. But it lets you determine what kind of soil you're gonna have based on the particles that make up that soil. So if you have, let's say 50% clay, and you have 25% silt and 25% sand, then you're able to determine where in this triangle you're going to fall. So let's follow that. So if I said 50% clay, it's going to be either somewhere over here, right? And then I said 25% silt, so that's going to be somewhere here. So now those two are intercepting here. And then I said 25% sand, which also matches up, maybe, where's my mouse? Which also matches up with this spot, right? 25% sand, 25% silt, and about, here, and about 50% clay. So that specific soil that I named is going to be a clay soil. If I had, on the other hand, say 60% sand and then 20% clay and 20% silt, then we can see what we have. 60% sand, then I have 20% clay, okay, and then I have 20% silt. That pretty much, what? Yeah. Oh, sorry, here. That's gonna put me in between a sandy loam and a sandy clay loam, okay? And I should clarify the sizes for those three types of particles. Clay under 0.40000